morning. It's been a little while. We had our little surprise visit at Christmas. It's good to see some of you guys, but it's also nice getting to meet a few new people this morning. I think I still have a few more to get around to. But always nice getting to be back in the US, always nice to be back with family, both blood family and Christian family. And it's a joy to see you guys this morning. Always a pleasure to be here at Highlands Ranch. And thankful because I can tell, or I know that there's many of you, get the reports we give or remain in prayer for us, and we're thankful for that because especially in a year like what we've had, there was a lot of need for prayer, and at the same, we saw the fruits of that prayer. It's not just we can put our efforts in, but if the Lord's not blessing it, you quickly find out there's only so far you can go. And this was one of those years when you realize that the Lord went much further than I thought. Caught up. Anyway, presentation tips. I don't need that. Okay. So just a quick update on how things are going in Cuenca. For those who don't know where Cuenca, Ecuador is, because I did have someone who I think confused Ecuador with Equatorial Guinea. So they were on the wrong continent. But we are in South America. Right? So they're North and South America. There's South America. We're the far western point of South America, and Cuenca is just kind of right in the middle of Ecuador, right along the mountain ranges that essentially extend from the Rockies clear down. So I'm really just a stone's throw away. But they're in the middle of the Andes. Is Cuenca. It's a very beautiful city. It's been known, they call it the Athens of Ecuador because they've got 52 Catholic churches just within the center of town, and it's always been a very religious city. It also was declared a national a World Heritage Site by the UN back years ago, and so we get a lot of tourism, and they keep up the colonial look around town. But it's also, it feels like a small city as you go through because each block feels like a town. But you get up and get a view of the city, and you realize it's really big. And there's a lot of need because when we arrived, there were two congregations of the church, and they were doing all right. But a deacon that had come with me from the church in Texas, he was walking around just going, I think you got a good plan, all this, but he's really wanting to show the elders and help them understand the need there is here. And as he's looking around, all he sees is, what feels like a small town with two congregations that seem to be doing all right. So what's the need? And I took him up to the top, showed him this view, and he goes, oh, no. We need to show him this, because there should be 20 congregations here. It's like, this place is big. There's a big need. It's roughly 700,000 in the metropolitan area. And at the moment, as I was, sorry, I just drew blank on your name, but I got mind everywhere. But I just explained, we have roughly 1 million that are depending on Cuenca for COVID treatment. We've got 23 ICU beds for 1 million people that are all coming to Cuenca. And so, it's a big area, even just outside the metropolitan area. A lot of, Cuenca has a big influence over a large area of people. And so that's why we wanted to go work there. This is a map of Cuenca itself. An interesting detail. Cuenca is the only place in the world where the sun comes up in the north and goes down in the south. according to the people in Cuenca, it doesn't really do that. It's just that the highway runs south on the west side of town, and then north going out the other side of town. And because it's the north to south highway, everyone refers to this as the south side of town and that as the north side of town. So when you go, you get really confused when they're explaining exactly where they are. Anyway, so this is a map of Cuenca, and the first church that was started back in 1975, I believe, if I got it right. It was the Los Suárez congregation that's still there today. A little picture of their church building, and they had grown at one point in time, pretty well, gotten pretty big, tried starting a few congregations here and there, but didn't work out too well. But they had several missionaries that visited them, and for a long time, that was the only church in town. And then 2004, I believe, the second group broke off. They originally were in the center part of town, where the word Cuenca is written. But they found some property up where the arrow is showing, and they started working up in that area, and they call it El Rosal. That's the name area of the church. It's the Church of Christ in El Rosal. And that's the church that my dad had first gotten to know, and then later we visited and we went down to work with, but with the plan of having a group that would plant a new congregation. And so they had a good, being further out, they had a nice plot of land, they built a nice large building, they've got room to eventually, I think, get up to 250 or 300 possibly. At the moment, I believe they're around 170. So they're doing all right. And that's, anyway, so when we arrived, they had been around 150. We got up to 180, and then we went and started a new congregation, and now they're back up to 170 after several came with us to go start the new congregation right here, back in that, right in more central, the downtown central part of Cuenca. And so we moved into a building that had been purchased as a Bible institute, but had been, for one reason or another, just abandoned. Little by little, and then eventually just abandoned for about 8 or 9 years. And so we cleaned it up and got it working, and had the Church of Christ there, put our sign out, and had a group of, our opening day, around 140 that visit us from multiple places, but our regular numbers were more around 80-ish with visitors and stuff on a good Sunday at the beginning. But we had the churches from Abilene, Texas, that decided to support me, sending me down there, that also came down and helped us with a campaign where one of the ladies would bring sewing machines to leave and donate either to the church to continue doing workshops or to ladies who came to just go start a business. She came down and was teaching those during the day, and we took advantage to do VBS while the mothers would come and learn sewing, and the children would come and do VBS with us. And at nighttime, we had the word just went for me in English. Just a gospel seminar, essentially, conference at nighttime. And it gave us wonderful, great contacts and wonderful friends, and an opportunity for all of them to come. As my dad had mentioned, one of the goals that we had and got to realize just before the pandemic kicked in November 2019 was to get all of the churches in town to work together and to have a Sunday morning worship together, just celebrating that we are one big church, even though we're multiple congregations. And so it was not easy, because from that first congregation that started, when the second one broke off, they asked their blessing, they got their blessing, but they kind of did it after they already knew where they were going to meet, who was going, and had everything planned for the next year. So while they technically got the blessing of the other church, they still left a little bit of bad blood. And when we arrived, members were good with each other, but leadership was kind of a little sour, and not a lot of work was being done, or things were being taken advantage of between the congregations. That was one of the things we wanted to see fixed before we started a new congregation. And so thankfully, as we were planning these campaign groups that were coming down and making sure the congregations had to work together to take advantage of the one campaign group that came for the whole city, and it just got us working together, and the Lord working as well. All of a sudden, after 13 years and 9 attempts, the leaders of the churches finally, realized how are we going to make peace? We need to make peace. Let's do this. And they came to an idea of well, one Sunday we'll have all the leaders come to this congregation. Everyone just takes the Lord's Supper together, and we'll go back to our church and help out there. But then the next Sunday, those from here will go to there, and they came over and they apologized for not being the best example, and committed to really moving forward with unity in Cuenca. And so when thankfully all this happened, and then we got to start the new congregation, and even then within Cuenca we had no worries about the new congregation getting started. But from outside of Cuenca, we would get people calling up saying, "So why'd you guys break off? Who did what? Give me the gossip." We said, no, this was with the blessing of all congregations. This was a work amongst all the congregations. We talked about it, we planned it. We wanted to make sure that we weren't going to drain any other congregations as we got started, because for us, the metric is not that we grow, but that the whole city's grown. That we're, as a city, the Lord's kingdom is growing. And it was a different model for many people who had simply seen the typical human infighting that happens amongst people, hey, wherever you are. And so it was beautiful to have that, as he was discussing, we had that morning, at least 500. It was hard to count, and some were saying, oh, it was over 6. We'll stick with 5+, right? But it was beautiful to see everyone together. And it was in there with us was a new congregation that had recently been restored. Because there was a group that broke off. They wanted to start something new, but then they realized they didn't even know exactly how they're going to preach the gospel. And they went to plant a church, not exactly sure what they're preaching. And so they started asking for help from everyone else, but everyone else was busy working where they were and not really, they'd visit here and there out to them, but not doing much. And the next thing they knew, someone with a very different doctrine and very different understanding of the Bible started teaching some very strange things, and they just said, well, at least we're getting someone to lead us. So they went years teaching all kinds of strange things and doing very different strange things. And eventually that person abandoned them as well. And then they came back and started calling us the members, and when there were 2 brothers that were free to keep following up with them. And so thankfully, Carlos Guerrero, that worked, Marshall knew him, met him years ago in Barinas. And he was there working with us in Cuenca. He was one of the brothers that really devoted his time to them and got them back on track. He and his wife would go and do home Bible studies with them, or preach on Sundays, or do little workshops whenever they could get free from the different, they were working amongst 3 congregations for a while. And so as much as they could, but they got them back on board, and they were there with us. They had several baptisms as people were realizing that things they were taught previously did not coincide with a biblical salvation. And they wanted to make sure that they were following the Lord's plan for their life. And then even that little church started building a new congregation. One of the members gave some land, and they put up some money, and it's a small little congregation. They might squeeze 100 in there, but they're building something. So anyway, so that's the exciting part of what's going on there. And then also further off to that side, there's the next capital of the province over, Azogues, where there's a small congregation. They also, Carlos Guerrero from Venezuela has been helping out with and working on. But thankfully, the church was growing, God kept blessing, and just before the pandemic, we were wondering which wall we need to knock out to make more people fit, because we're just squeezing in way too tight. But it was a beautiful time. And just before that United Worship, we had huge riots and protests nationwide all across the country. They kind of paralyzed everything. And so it was thankful that we got to do that United Worship when we did, because everything really started getting chaotic even before the pandemic started. But in the in-between, and just before we got locked down, we had our 2-year anniversary. And here we have a picture of all those who were present. We had a brother from Mexico that came down to do a 3-day campaign leading up to our anniversary Sunday. And it was just a wonderful time. But soon after we got locked down, because we had the country paralyzed with riots previously, there were a lot of people, the riots were because of economic situations. The riots made the economic situations even worse. And then the pandemic hit, and they got locked down even harder than anything you guys had here, from my understanding. And so we got permissions, thankfully. The Lord bless us with good friends that named us as part of their business as giving out essential foods, and we were able to take foods that thankfully many Christians from many congregations and people all over helped us with, and we're thankful. But we had long food lines that were meeting outside the building, and just lots of neighbors we were trying to help out. We were helping out amongst the members, but also we got money to help out specifically for those who were not of the membership, but just helping our neighbors. And so we gave out, I think, around 400 baskets, right, of food for different families, taking care of various different families. And well, I won't do that just yet. But an interesting thing was just there in front of the building where we're handing out, soon after, a lot of times you hand out a lot of things and you don't really know I mean, you know the impact you had on their stomach, but you don't know just if it was appreciated or not. And just a few months ago, I was needing to drop off a bunch of heavy stuff at the building. And as I had always done, and I'd always ask whenever I saw one of the transit cops around, I'd ask, hey, can I pull in here, drop things off? Oh yeah, yes, not a problem. As long as you're just dropping something off and moving quickly, because it's stuff we have to keep this clear. All right. So I always got permission, always came through. This time came through, and some guy, I don't even think he's a neighbor. He just walking down the street. He just, a bike cop's passing by, and he just looks at the bike cop and points at my car, and he's like, "What's up, man? Why aren't you doing something about this?" Right? And I was like, "Oh, don't worry. It's the permission we always get." But he looks into it and realizes, no, I actually don't have permission. And because he called it in, and he has to write me a ticket. Well, the neighbors that had received baskets for themselves or for family or different things like that, they all start coming out and chewing him out. How dare you kick this man? Do you not know who he is? He fed us in the pandemic. They start shaming him for writing me a ticket. And I stay quiet. I'm like, I'm not going to say a word. Like, it's, if I get a ticket, I get a ticket. But it was touching because, the Cuencanos, those on the coast, they might not even know you when they jump right in. In the mountains, they're a little more tight-knit, and they're not just speaking up for anybody. It's more of typically only amongst family or really close friends. So it was a touching thing to see that they would feel that need and that desire to defend us for the good work that we've done. So it was a nice thing. But yeah, so as the pandemic went on, people in Ecuador don't live like this. Some people think, there's some who might, but in general, they all have nice kitchens. And she does as well, but she couldn't get the cylinders of natural gas delivered to her house because on the lockdown, they just weren't organized and things just weren't getting places. And so they moved out to the country to build a home and had a nice home. They just couldn't get any gas to run their nice new stove. And so they were cooking out over wood and just making the most of it amongst members. And we did the best we could to provide for each other at that time. But the beauty was that the Lord kept working. Even lockdown, I got to, if you see that first one down the bottom, it was the first time I baptized somebody with a mask on, but they were freaked out at the time. So I was there baptizing with a mask on. And, but the Lord continued to bless. We took advantage of some of the time locked down to make much needed fixes on the building, which also gave us opportunity for secret fellowship. So we're sneaking in to do some work projects because of, a floor that needed desperately changed. It was literally the concrete's just coming up, but a pipe busted as well, and that gave us the excuses we needed to get some stuff fixed. Get a new floor, get a new roof, stop some drips. But in the meantime, we kept feeling, as so many would feel, that man, you just can't get anything done with all these lockdowns. But then as I started coming along to the third anniversary of the church, and then getting things ready to share with other people, I realized, oh no, I might have felt locked down, but God wasn't. He was still working. We ended up having a pretty good year when it came to the studies we had, a lot of spiritual growth for certain individuals, the baptisms. It was just a wonderful time. There, they like getting certificates when they get baptized to remember the date and to be official. So at the anniversary, we ended up, to those who couldn't make it, because transportation was still tough for many, not all bus lines were running and stuff like that. But for those who were there, they got their certificates, and some others, we still have their certificates stored away because they've not been able to come back to be with us just yet. But we did take advantage at our third anniversary to have a little cookout with those who did show up. We got a few more than the city would have allowed. But we had to do a 2-room setup with 2 different projectors, and even then we were for lockdown situations busting at the seams. And then recently we have a young man from our congregation that decided to go to the preaching school in Quito, and we've been supporting him up there to go study. He came back for his internship and wanted to do a kids soccer day, or for the month of July, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, doing little soccer camps at the public fields they have there for the city. It's the city park. And at the same time was, sending kids, giving the kids little talks and and setting them home with Bible verses and all this kind of stuff. And then they did, that Sunday, I got all the pictures of, well, they did, they like having a, not just like the certificate thing, they also, you have an opening and closing ceremony for everything. And so when they finished all of this, they do the closing ceremony that would be right after church on Sunday. so we had a lot of parents that showed up and were very grateful for the attention their children had gotten, not only in the camp, but that, after church, we had some food and we, they gave them little, certificates of acknowledgement of having done the camp and all this kind of stuff, and played games with the kids and all this, as a little potluck afterwards. And they were just very, very grateful for the attention they got. And so we got a lot of follow-up when I get back for those families that we made the contacts through. But all of that to say that, well, there is a shining light. The Lord's continuing to work. He will continue to work, and we just simply have to let him do so, which does lead into the brief lesson I'll give now, because I think we're a little longer than I thought I would on the presentation. But that's just a nice picture near our house if you want to come see it in person. About 20 minutes from our house, but I love the picture. Anyway, I'll leave that up as something pretty to look at while I discuss other things. But if I would say I learned a lesson this year from all the lockdowns, from all the situations that have gone on, it was exactly that the Lord continued to work, right? His kingdom continued to grow. There was nothing that was going to stop it. Even when I felt that we had been paralyzed, even when I felt I was losing time, even when I felt that, man, we might be losing members soon because this stuff's rough. And when we came out of it, there was a great joy just to finally get to be together. And there were, we were continuing to grow despite all these things that God put, or the world had put in the way, and God was working through. And so it's really a beautiful thing. And considering that, I wanted to touch on one of the parables Jesus taught about the kingdom. And so for those of you who, I hope everyone brought their Bibles today. We got a Bible? Let's look at Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 and 32, right? Didn't have a lot of time, so I gave you 2 verses. Simple, right? How could he possibly go long with just 2 verses? But miracles never cease. So Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 and 32. We'll join me. And I'll read. It says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Well, that's real short. Where are we getting at with that, right? And the thing is, it really is a simple lesson, right? If we want to finish right now, I got it for you. God takes little things and makes them big. Amen. Go home. Okay, right. I like this guy. Bring it back. But yeah, you didn't get dressed up just to hear that, right? Digging in a little deeper. We call this, it says Jesus told another parable. What's a parable? I won't get into Greek lessons, but it comes from a Greek word that just means to cast alongside. If you've ever played, anyone ever played bocce ball here? It's not really a thing. They play in Venezuela, well, that's Rio, yes, But they take the little granite ball and you throw it out, and then everyone, is it 6 or 8 other large granite balls? It's 3 and 3 or 4 and 4, something like that. And each person tries to get it as close to the other ball as you can without touching it, right? You're just trying to get it right there close, and you can knock someone else's ball out of the way so that you're the closer one. And it's a fun little game that they just play out in the countryside, right? The word parabole just means that. Casting it out, getting it right there close, something parallel to it, something that you can hold in your hand that goes right alongside a spiritual truth. And so Jesus does that with all these parables. He takes something that spiritually we might not quite comprehend, and then he runs it parallel to something you can hold in your hand, something you know already, something you've seen in life. And so in this parable, he says, well, consider the mustard seed. And there's those who want to be contrarian, as everyone's contrarian and critical in the world today, right? And they say, well, the mustard seed is not actually the smallest seed in the world. Do you know that? Question. What is the smallest mustard? I've tried to look it up, and I can't get anyone to give me consensus. I Googled it like crazy. What is the smallest seed in the world then? Crickets. There's no consensus on what is the smallest seed. And then, okay, well then what would be the greatest ratio difference between a seed and a plant or a tree? Crickets. I couldn't find a thing. I looked quite a bit, right? So no one's got a better analogy than Jesus. They just like to criticize it, right? They say the mustard seed is not the smallest seed. Well, had he spoken of the smallest seed, would they have known what it was? Many look at the Bible as though it's trying to be the universal, end all counsel on every single detail. But if you look at John, what does he say? These things were written that you might believe, right? Simply that you might believe. It's written in your context so you can understand it. My dad always gives the talking about pecan pie in Latin America. They don't get it. They don't have pecans. Recently, we finally got pecans. They know what pecans are now, but they've not had pecan pies. But they're just, bien me sabes always you're right, or tres leches you've seen sometimes around here, but there's desserts they have you wouldn't know, and desserts you have that they wouldn't know. And if you're preaching, you kind of need to keep it in context. I don't take this as Bible, but I would suggest that if Jesus' ministry had been in China, he would not have been the bread of life, but the rice of life. Because and so let's break bread. They don't say let's break bread. They say eat rice. Did you eat yet? Did you have rice yet? Literally, rice is their word for food. So it was all in context. Bread was the most basic food they had, and you wouldn't live without it. Okay, I'm the bread of life. Done. Mustard seed was the smallest they'd seen. All right. Technically, according to modern definitions, the mustard tree is only a plant. But it's large enough to have strong, rigid branches so that birds who only perch in trees also perch in the mustard plant. People like to be critical. It's easy to be critical. It's easy to underestimate things or to see the error or the faults or what's lacking in something. The mustard seed is the smallest. Okay. But that actually gets right to the point of what Jesus is trying to teach. Something small, something unexpected. You look at a mustard seed, I don't know, I've been told, I'm not an expert on seeds, I'm not a botanist. But if you got your Bible in front of you, odds are the size of the period in your Bible is the size of a mustard seed. And then the mustard plant or tree, however you want to call it, ends up growing to over 30 feet tall and roughly 30 feet wide. It gets big, at least the ones that they have around Israel. Understandably, that's a big difference. You would not have expected for that to come about. So you say, well, then why? So what's the point of this? Where's Jesus going with this lesson? God loves to work in situations where it's obvious that the growth came from him. He loves to work in situations where I can't take the glory. And yet, as humans, we continually limit what God can do through us simply based on who I am or what situation we're in. But if we look at how the Lord developed his kingdom from the very beginning, it was always a mustard seed kingdom. We look at Jesus, right? Within that seed, amazing potential. But could the world possibly have seen it? This baby that they move along, sweep aside the sloth so he can lay him down in a manger. Shepherds, those who tend the sheep out in the fields, probably smell like the sheep out in the fields, were the ones that visited at his birth. The angels were singing, but I don't know how many got to or noticed it. They had to flee and go down to Egypt, leaving their own land, living as strangers in another land. And yet this is the future king. He comes back to live in Nazareth, what some would call the armpit of Galilee. And, it's said in John chapter 1, verse 46, does anything good ever come out of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? There was very, in worldly sense, such a mustard seed, such a little, humble beginning. When Jesus spoke in John chapter 7, verse 15, they're just blown away. This guy has no education. The rabbis are like, how did he come to understand the things that he understands if he didn't get the stamp of approval from anyone else? He doesn't have a letter of recommendation. He doesn't have a diploma. He's not credentialed. And yet he speaks as he speaks. This is incredible. When we look to leaders in America, we look to the West Point type, Harvard type. And he wasn't even community college type. He didn't have an education. He wasn't some, in the world's eyes, that's just the size of a period, man. But that's how God likes work. He's not looking for men's credentials. He's looking for his opportunity to show what he can do. And that we have a need to depend on him. When someone wanted to join Jesus' ministry, as it's starting to get some steam, he reminds him, foxes have holes and birds have nests. Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. How many big movements in the world's eyes are just broke? And yet, that was Jesus' ministry. He just moved along. Even his friends and his apostles were rather unremarkable people in the eyes of the world. Fishermen, tax collectors, you name it, there's something you could criticize about each one of the people he chose to go along with him and start the kingdom. It'd be hard to not find one. They'd be criticized. They'd be seen as small in this world. And then even as you get to Acts chapter 1, Jesus already said it's finished. He's come back and he's talking. He said, wait in Jerusalem. Don't go anywhere. It's coming. Just wait in Jerusalem. They had 120 waiting there. Hey, that's a pretty good ministry after 3 years. Right? 3 years and giving your whole life for it, you got 120 waiting around in Jerusalem. But were big things about to happen? The Holy Spirit came on and they spoke and they preached the gospel. And we see in Acts chapter 2, verse 41, that 3,000 were added. Chapter 4, verse 4, 5,000 men, once again, were baptized. Chapter 5, verse 14, multitudes were constantly added, it says. Chapter 6, verse 7, the word spread, even priests were obedient to the faith. The leaders of the Jews were turning to Christianity. Chapter 9, verse 31, it says it continued to increase. Chapter 11, verse 21, large number who believed turned to the Lord. Chapter 12, verse 24, the word continued to grow and multiply. Multiply just means you added 5, right? What does the word multiply imply? It means the number you had was made again, at least double. And we've already seen 3,000, 5,000, more, and then multiply. It's just this small hump, but it was only a mustard seed. How's this happening? Where did this come from? We can see from things that Romans were saying, they're just baffled by this sect, as they would call it, that's just going everywhere, taking over the world. Chapter 4, verse 1, a large number of people believed, Jews and Greeks. Chapter 16, verse 5, the church is increasing in number daily. How in the world do they increase daily? You can only preach once on Sunday. I mean, surely it takes the word of the preacher for someone deciding to get baptized. Right? Or could it be that everywhere, every member went, everyone was a seed, that gospel was getting planted, and growth was just happening as everyone shared that good news of what they had received, of what had changed their life, of what had given them a new beginning. Chapter 17, verse 4, a large number of God-fearing Greeks and many women also baptized. They had incredible growth that no one anticipated, no one could have foreseen, and no one could even believe at the moment. Paul was accused of having turned the world upside down by a Roman. That requires a little bit of humility on the Roman part. We control this world, but you turn it upside down. How did you do this? And Paul would have been the first to say, it's not about me. It's what the Lord was trying to work. So what we have to remember, the point I'm getting to, is don't allow yourself to be victimized by what you would perceive as the size of your influence, your ministry, your ability, or your situation in life. It's so easy to want to make excuses and say, well, if only we were a church of 3,000. Oh, then we could do all these great things. But, till then, we'll just wait for it. Or I could talk to my neighbor if only I had a degree that would give me the permission. We have a lot of thinking like that connected. So that means you're nothing until you have a piece of paper. And there's a little bit of insight. There's a lot of words in Venezuela that are like major groserías, profanities for us, that for them is just kind of, maybe you shouldn't say it, they just, whatever, and so a lot of words that would be just major profanities in Venezuela, they just, I've even heard them in sermons. Right? So there's definitely a different expectation or understanding as to what is or isn't appropriate to be said in public between countries. But the one thing you never call anyone in Ecuador is dummy, stupid, uneducated. Cut to the heart. You couldn't say anything worse. You can call me an illegitimate child. You can call me whatever you want. Don't you call me an Do we put limits upon ourselves? Allow society to put limits upon us that God himself does not even see? I'm sure you guys have heard this. I'm stealing this one from my dad. But Moses approaching a burning bush that is not consumed and called to do the Lord's work, but I'm not good to talk. Okay, fine. Let Aaron talk for you. That's fine. Well, then who am I going to say sent me? The I am. And I'll show them who that is. Well, how is it possibly going to work? How are you? It's all this, me, I'm nothing. How are you? Nothing can be done through me. And so as my dad put it, well, what do you have in your hand? A stick. I think that was you said. I've heard a lot of sermons. But a staff. Oh, yeah. So just take that and throw it down, become a snake, pick it up, and throw it back into a staff. Or touch it to the rock and water's just going to pour right out. Or touch it to the ocean, it's going to split wide open. Man, good thing he found that one particular stick. Or was it not about the stick? It's not about the staff. It's about God. He was going to do it anyway. It wasn't about Moses, other than just being a man of faith, a man who hoped in the Lord and trusted that he would give the victory. And God loves finding that mustard seed, bringing him out of the desert to flip the whole world upside down. Supposed to go to a what time? I'm getting a little long. The sign of a good preacher. Anyway, so I've been told. There's many stories like that throughout the Bible. And even if you look throughout just Christians in general, we can see it today. And I'm not one to like to necessarily exalt men, but sometimes it's good to recognize what the Lord has done amongst men. And one that, living in Tennessee, there's a university named David Lipscomb. One said, well, who in the world is that guy? Why did he get a name on it? Right? And from what I read about him, I don't think he'd like having his name on the building. But humble beginnings, a man, he and his family, believers in just sticking to the gospel, had a church in their home in 1834, so before the Civil War. It was majority slave. Later moved up to Illinois to go free them, and then came back. Started publishing a little thing within the churches called the Gospel Advocate to unify churches, to give news back and forth, and to give solid lessons in Bible studies about things that weren't so well understood in the world. We started it in 1855. 5 years later, Civil War started, and not much could continue. After the Civil War, he's still living in the South, and he couldn't hardly get food, but he found ways to get paper and start publishing again. Because he saw a need for unity, especially in the Lord's church. Start passing all these things out. He didn't have a lot, he wasn't someone famous, he wasn't someone well known. From others, from what you can read of others or what he himself would say, he was probably one of the least talented speakers out there. And yet a Bible college was named after him. And so others, eventually he got to where, I think he had a few conferences, you might say, that he got to speak to that were large. But they'd ask him, they say, oh, what's the secret to being a great preacher? He'd say, well, find someone willing to listen. Preach. He was it was more common for him not to speak in an auditorium, but to go into a home where they didn't have a couch, so everyone would just sit on the bed, and he'd preach to those who were sitting on the bed. And he'd say, well, next Sunday, try to have somebody else, try and bring some visitors. And it grew and grew and grew, and he planted several congregations around Nashville that undoubtedly led to the large presence of the church in Nashville today. Humble beginnings. But a quote that I love from him was he said, I'll make sure I get it right. Do not despise the day of small things. Do not despise the day of small things. Because in the Lord's kingdom, everything starts with a mustard seed. But with the Lord's help, it never ends that way. He has so much in store. He has so much planned if we just allow it. We simply let him work through us. It's not about being that preacher with the golden tongue. It's more about just being someone that has a heart for the Lord and for those who need him. I think of, I had, sorry, you haven't read the verse this morning. Anyway, but the verse we read this morning, I picked out the parable or the story of Jesus' miracle with the bread and the fish is told in every single gospel. But only the Gospel of John points out that it was a young man that gave it to him. And the others, it just says, well, the disciples just comment, all we have is this. But John chapter, there in the Gospel of John chapter 6, it's that you point out, it's just a little boy that walks up and says, well, this is all I've got. I got 5 pieces of bread. I got 2 fish. I'm going to put it in the Lord's hand. Anything you can do with this? And you just know. I mean, Jesus already knew what was going to happen. It says he was even trying that, right? Saying, oh, are you guys going to have faith by me or not? And this little boy comes up, next to nothing to offer, in front of such a great need. And you just know that the Lord says, this is exactly what I was looking for. This was the plan all along. To have that mustard seed beginning for something great to grow from. The disciples were simply thinking, if only we had 1,000 fish. If only we had 10,000 loaves of bread. If only we had. And the boy just simply said, this is what I've got. Do with it, Lord, what you can. God wants to do something similar with all of us. Just as Paul said, he's not looking for our strength to then show his strength, but rather in my weakness, am I made strong. In my weakness, his strength is shown. He's looking for humble beginnings. He's looking for humble people, for hearts that would reach out to him. We see the story of Gideon threshing in a valley when you should be threshing, where the wind can take it away. Filthy, sweaty, cowering down, hiding from his enemies. And an angel says, great warrior of God. He certainly says, where? Look at over his shoulder. Where might I find this great warrior of God? Because certainly they're not talking to me. And then he gets an army, a solid army to get behind him. And God says, that's just too much for me. All those who don't want to be here, send them home. Right? Chunks leave and he starts sweating. Yeah, that's still too much. Take him down to the river. And I don't want anyone who cups the water to come with us. Only those who stick their face into the river and drink like a dog. Save those. I want those to be my army. It's just, you kidding me? I don't want a big, powerful human presence. I'm looking for something humble. I'm looking for those who will simply just trust me. It was important for God that when the walls of Jericho fell and his people conquered a city that they never should have been able to conquer, according to human standards, that they not take any treasure with them. Achan and his family took some, and it was the anathema that they had amongst them. It was a curse upon all of the Israelites. And why? Because God says, I don't want anyone to say they made you rich. I don't want anyone to say they made you powerful. It needs to come from me. Because this is my mustard seed. It's my growth. Don't claim it for yourself. Don't make excuses. Humbly seek me. Humbly let me work in you. I want to do great things. So simple little 2 verses in the gospel about a mustard seed. Simple lesson that God likes to take little things and make them huge. There's so much to think about. Whether we'll allow him to just use us as a mustard seed. I pray that we all open our hearts to do so today. God bless you.